Welcome if you are joining us live. Welcome if you come in very soon, or if you are watching this in the catch-up party afterwards. It should hopefully be saved on the page here. It's great to be here in the Aspire4Business online group and to have just a short amount of time, probably 15-20 minutes, with some time for any questions at the end, to talk about the importance of developing a strong mindset for successful business. And spoiler alert right at the off, a successful mindset and a strong mindset for life in general as well. And as we'll get into, the two are entwined. But a few little boring bits. My name is Mooney. You've probably picked that up by now. I run a learning and development consultancy called CMLearning. And I've been helping people to develop for over 20 years, back when I had hair. I'm loving my lockdown haircut at the minute, by the way. It's great, it keeps things so simple. Oh, hi Nikki. Yes, professionally, what I love most about helping people to develop their mindset is that incredible change that it can spark and support people with. And so it's really my privilege to be able to help people to have that check up from the neck up, as I put it. We put in the promo. But the slightly less boring stuff is that I do this because I fiercely believe in the difference that it can make, and I know this to be true. From my experience. Hi Nikki, great to have you. I know this to be true. We all have our own story. We all have our own story to tell. We all have our own hardships in life, our own trauma and experiences that again we will get into more. And this is a little bit about mine. I grew up in Northern Ireland in the 1980s, hence my weird accent, hybrid Northern Irish Dorset. My mother was an alcoholic, and she separated from my father when I was very little. And she quickly met the man who was to become my stepfather, also an alcoholic, and they began a very toxic and destructive relationship. And after years of ups and downs, I'll call them, I finally moved in with my dad and my stepmother when I was 11. And that was at around the same time that I began to realise that I was gay. Not an easy experience at that time in Northern Ireland. And my little brother was born 5 years later. And because of my mother's drinking, he was quickly taken into care. And then a year or two after that, my first boyfriend tragically decided to take his own life, and my mother died when I was 23, quickly followed by my stepfather a few years later. Why am I telling you this? Certainly, why am I telling you this if you've just decided to bring along your lunch in the sun? Oh, this is going to be great. Well, for me, from an early age, I had a choice point, as I call it. I had a choice point. I could either decide to work on how I was feeling and the emotions that I was experiencing, or I could choose to ignore them, and I could choose to repress them. And so, a quick side note, it did help that from an early age, my stepmother was studying throughout many of my early teenage years to become a social worker, and so I was constantly her guinea pig for coaching and counselling, which did help a lot. And in the space of a very few short years, and from a young age, I learned so much about my own mindset and my own resilience that I might have otherwise missed. I learned how to manage that inner critic when I would blame myself for my mother's drinking. Why can't I help her? Why doesn't she love me enough to stop? I began to understand the power that lies in where I choose to put my focus. And what we're about to enter into, in my opinion, is much more than that cheesy positive mental attitude, that PMA that used to get bandied about back in the 90s and early noughties. But it's about this tangible choice of deciding where to burn my energy. And then I started to learn about that great impact of the words that we tell ourselves, both out loud and in our own heads as well. I like to think that now I'm a fairly well-adjusted human, if there is such a thing, and I've lived here in Bournemouth with Sean and our assortment of dogs for the last 21 years. And this is why I'm so passionate about helping people to develop their mindset, because of that huge difference that it can make for us both personally and professionally, in terms of our levels of resilience, the quality of the relationships that we have with the people around us, and the results that we can achieve from that. Just as we get into the session, I know I mentioned questions. I'll give time to those at the end. Do keep anything coming through in the chat stream, because I'm trying to be a bit clever with keeping an eye on kind of what's going on technically in front of me. So I will try and keep an eye on the chat stuff as we go on. And then it'd be great if you are watching this on the catch up, any comments or questions, anything that you've got coming in, because I'm sure we'll get pinged and keep track of it that way as well. So why both then? Why both? I keep mentioning this personal and professional element. In my experience, it's no longer okay for us to, as a business, to tell our people to leave their emotions at the door. We used to hear that all the time, leave it at the door. For some people that might work, not that many of us have a door in the traditional sense at the minute, but we show up to work as a complete person, rather than some robot able to flick a switch. And if we can have that strong mindset in life, then our businesses will reap the benefits from a professional aspect and a professional perspective. Hi there, hi, great to have you with us. As you come in, say hello. We have just kicked off. We've literally just kicked off. You haven't missed much. Of course, there are huge business benefits as well to be had from this mindset development. If we think about the average cost of recruiting somebody who leaves, in terms of increasing that retention, can be up to £12,000 to replace an employee. We're going to have higher engagement, and companies with higher engagement are up to 21% more profitable. And we're going to provide progression, particularly for our millennial employees, who are 3 times more likely to stay if they're offered progression. So where do we start then? In terms of the brain, see, that's my accent coming through there. The brain, that's my English version. The brain is my Northern Irish version. I am a bit of a brain geek. I subscribe to Brain Research magazine. This is how I spend my time reading things like that at night. But from what we know about the brain, it does so many amazing things for us in order to have kept us around for so long. And it also does so much that can be unknowingly harmful for us as well. And if we just think about times of great change, such as now, and wherever you're watching this from, I'm used to having lots of cameras that I can see in an online development session. But wherever you're watching this from, show me your fist. Show me your fist. Imagine I can see you in front of the camera, and if you imagine that this is your brain, and that your wrist is your brainstem, here at the base of the brain is what we call the reptilian complex, and that's the bit that controls our fight, our flight, our freeze response, things like that. Then you've got this squirrely bit in the middle, and that's our limbic system, which controls our emotional brain. Then if you clasp your hand, your other hand over your fist, here we have the neocortex, sometimes called our thinking cap. And if you begin to just wiggle your fingers, just like that, when everything is in flow and when the endorphins are rushing, this is a little bit of what our brain looks like. We can think of new ideas, we're excited, we might feel particularly hopeful for the future. Pardon me. And then if you stop and just clamp your other hand over your fist, this might be where many of us are at the minute. We might feel frozen, we might feel restricted, we might have a lack of ideas, a lack of creativity, we might be feeling worried, we might be justifiably feeling anxious about what may or may not happen in the future. And during change that we're experiencing now, our brains will all be doing something different to each other. So if you think about your perspective on change, you might be somebody who wiggles your fingers. Great, bring it on, change, love it. New start, this is really exciting. Or you could be somebody more like the brain's default position, where we clamp down and we think about that default position of the brain. How will this impact me? How will this change my world? What am I going to lose? And so thanks for going with me on that if you did. Got visions of you all sat at your computers doing that now. But there's a key learning point here when it comes to how the brain works and how it tries to help us and often has that opposite effect. When we're not presented with enough information, then our brilliant brain creates the information. Have you ever jumped to a conclusion? Tell me in the comments, have you ever jumped to a conclusion? Of course, you have. I have. You have. We all have. Congratulations, because that's what we're programmed to do. It's part of that reason why we've lasted so long. We're not given the information, we create the information. That's why sometimes 2 and 2 makes 4, sometimes it makes 400. And if we can develop that habit of sense checking our assumptions and learning to understand and empathise with the perspective of others, then we're immediately beginning to increase our levels of resilience, because suddenly we no longer have to be right and they have to be wrong. We begin to learn that people are not being difficult, they're just different to us. And so that human disposition is for us to carry on as long as we can, before we're unable to go on any longer, especially at times like this, times of great change. And I don't know about you, but this is my first global pandemic too. And many of us are facing very real and very genuine concerns, both financially, well, physically, emotionally, and mentally. And we feel that we must be there for others, particularly in our business. We must be there for our clients, we must be there for our people, not to mention our personal lives as well. We begin to feel that we can't take time for ourselves, that if we name how we're feeling, then we're bound to succumb to those feelings and to give them power. And in my experience, the exact opposite is true. If we recognise and if we name how we're feeling, then that takes away the power and it begins to give it back to us. From there, we can start to normalise how we're feeling. We begin to reality check, such as telling ourselves things like, okay, this is going to be really rough for a while. Things aren't going to be good as they were before for quite a while. We start giving ourselves that permission to feel that way. And it's really interesting at the moment, and I don't know if you've noticed this, again let me know in the chat comments. Over the last couple of months, all the so-called experts, in inverted commas, telling us how productive we should be being with all this extra time that we have. The only problem with that is that doesn't recognise how we may be feeling. So again, in my meager opinion, it's okay for us not to learn a new language. It's okay for us not to completely feng shui our entire house. It's okay to just get through as best we can, and setting ourselves up for anything else than that sometimes can just simply set us up for failure when we don't achieve that huge goal. So what we're talking about here is taking our head out of the sand, lifting our head out of the sand during those times of extreme change. And by doing that, we begin to understand that it's okay to feel overwhelmed. It won't be forever. Just like the clouds, this too shall pass. We need to be starting to be much more patient with ourselves and each other, the people around us as well. And then finally, beware of experts. I mentioned them a second ago. Beware of experts. All the experts who crawl out of the woodwork at the minute and tell you things, myself included. One thing I find works brilliantly for my mindset is just unplugging from them. Unplugging from the 24-hour rolling news and the impact that can have on us emotionally, and ironically mentioning this on a Facebook Live from social media as well sometimes. Thank you, Beverley, that means a lot. I hope it is useful, I hope it's enjoyable. I've got another 5 or so minutes just to hopefully spark something for you, to offer something. What I always think with this stuff, by the way, is that much of, if not everything, of what I'm talking about today makes logical sense, and we may already know it or have an awareness of it. But again, in my experience, sometimes it can just depend on that moment in time when we hear this stuff. We might be having a different thought, a different feeling, a different attitude, and sometimes it can just take that different moment to hear something that we kind of know to spark something quite different. So all of this then moves us very firmly towards having a growth mindset. And remember how great the brain is. One other thing that our brain is amazing at is catastrophizing. Have you ever done that? Have you ever catastrophized? Do you know what I mean by that? I used to be an amazing catastrophizer. My childhood required me to consider the ifs and the buts and the maybes of so many volatile situations, and it made me feel safe when I was a child to think of every possible outcome and to have a response for each one. Then in 2012, much after childhood, of course, I was getting ready to set up my own business, and even though I'd done some work to address my catastrophizing, I knew that I couldn't take that with me into the next phase of my life. And so I was on holiday around about that time, and I was reading one of my favourite books, Susan Jeffers' Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. You've probably heard of it. If you haven't, there it is for you. A great lady passed away a few years ago, and that book has been around for many decades. But I was on holiday in 2012, getting ready to start my own business, wanted to get rid of this catastrophizing, so you can tell why I was reading that book. Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. I remember it clear as day. I was lying by the pool, and I read a passage that said, where Susan Jeffers writes, it is reported that over 90% of what we worry about never happens. That means that our negative worries have less than a 10% chance of being correct. Now, I don't know where she got those stats from. I do like to try and quantify stats when I spout them out like this, but just reading that one sentence stopped me in my tracks, because that was me. I was putting all of my focus towards the 90% of the stuff that just genuinely did not happen. And from that point on, I made a commitment to tune into my thinking when my automatic response was to expect the worst. And that catastrophizing, that, well, what if this happens, what if that happens, then this will happen, then that will happen. And suddenly I was making no money in my business, my fictional business that I hadn't even started yet, and I was homeless. So I said earlier, this isn't cheesy positive mental attitude. This isn't hope for the best. And this isn't keep your chin up, because that's not helpful, and it's intangible. This is about being prepared for the worst, because again, I mentioned earlier, we've all faced trauma in our lives, and we will face trauma again. This is about getting to choose where we put our focus, and in a world where we can increasingly feel that we have no control, particularly at the minute, then much of the time this is our main area of influence, where we put our focus. It totally is, Beverley. It's this waste of energy, and if we, because again, the brain tries to help us, the brain tries to keep us safe by preparing for the worst, and what we are great at remembering with our beautiful brains are all the times when things go wrong. That's the brain's default position again, showing up. What we need to start doing is to start remembering either all the times when the worst didn't happen or when things went really well, because we don't think about that, we don't recall that, and we don't remember that. Thank you, it's a great comment. So this difference between a fixed mindset, which in my view is something like I can't do it, I'm going to fail, and a growth mindset, which you could quite simply add the word yet onto the end of the fixed statement. So I can't yet. That's the difference between I'm going to fail, fixed mindset, and I'm still learning, growth mindset. We get to choose where we focus. You've already learned in a very short space of time that I am a huge brain geek. I'm also a country music geek, and Naomi Judd, if you've ever heard of her, once said what became one of my favourite quotes, which is that your body hears what your mind says. Your body hears what your mind says. So my advice is, if you don't already listen, then start to listen and tune into that inner voice, and develop some positive affirmations for yourself that you can practice and that you can say out loud. Something I do a huge amount of the time. We haven't got lots of time left to delve completely into the benefits of positive affirmations, but just that habit of telling us that our inner voice something, and our outer voice, by saying it out loud, can have a huge effect in terms of we get what we focus on. We get to choose where we focus, I've already mentioned that, and we get what we focus on. So the two are very much linked. So it would be great, I know we haven't got dozens and dozens of people on, but either now or if you are catching up in the comments later on, after this recording's finished, then why don't we just start to litter the comment box with our favourite positive affirmations? That would be amazing. Some of mine that I'll try and remember to add in there, and I tell myself these often on the motorway, out loud in the car when I'm driving to, when I used to be able to drive places, to facilitate face to face, or in front of the mirror. You've got this, Mooney. You know what you're doing. These are the ones I tell myself, my top 5 or 6. I'm proud of who I am, and I'm proud of who I've become. Sometimes I'm proud of who I'm becoming. I rock at being me. That's one of my favourites. I deserve to be heard. And sometimes, importantly, over the last few weeks, I'm allowed to have bad days. So just to sum up then, my few top tips that from what I've talked through is number 1, start tuning into yourself. If you're not already, I mentioned in some of the promo stuff, and Beverley helped to do this, this could be about beginning to develop your mindset. You might already have a really strong mindset. It could be about continuing that development as well. So start tuning into yourself, your thoughts, your emotions, become more aware of your assumptions. The second point, take your head out of the sand. Remember we talked about that. Take your head out of the sand, and give your mindset as much development as you would your technical skills that you need in your business, because a strong mindset is just as vital. And then finally, begin to change that inner and outer voice that you use. We don't talk about this kind of thing very often, our mindset and this kind of stuff that I've been talking about for the last 15 minutes or so. It's pretty simple to develop a resilient mindset, but simple doesn't necessarily make it easy. It does take time, it takes focus, it takes effort, and it takes commitment to switch off that autopilot mode that I've spoken about today in terms of how the brain tries to help us. Switch off that autopilot to consider our triggers, our emotions, our reactions, and begin to rewrite them into the responses that we want them to be. And so the question that I'd like to leave you with then, if you've made it this long, is, are you on autopilot? And that kind of is it. I shall hang about for a couple of minutes, and we'll keep chatting in the comments. Feel free to keep any stuff coming through while I catch up. Oh, I love that. Yes, you rock. That's a good one. All you are is more than enough, as a positive affirmations. I might steal that one with pride, Beverley. Laird Allen, when I used to commute, I used to say, I'm feeling great today, loudly to myself. Yes, and there is something there, isn't there, about even if we're not feeling 100%, we're feeling 80%. Saying something like that can help us to feel 100% of 80%, if that makes sense. And then it starts to rise. You'll tell numbers aren't my game either. Not a huge mathematician, so that makes sense to me. It might not make sense to others. And I get the kids to do it on the walk to school. Love it, passing that on. Feel great today. It is a great one, isn't it? You are more than welcome. Like I say, if you're watching now, thank you for joining us. If you are catching up, then I hope it's useful. Keep any comments coming in the stream, and Beverley and I will keep an eye on them, and it'd be great to get some debate coming on that. Thank you, Beverley. I'm glad it's been useful. And over and out for now. I guess that's it. I will end the recording now. Thanks for joining us. Bye, everyone.